Welcome, everyone. My name is Kathy Broussard, and I'd like to welcome you to the very first Black History Month celebration hosted by the Black and African American Affinity Group. Okay, so first up, we're going to have Kenya Wheeler, who will highlight the two women of color that led the fight for justice on public transit right here in the city. Without further ado, I'm going to have Kenya Wheeler come on up.
Thank you, Kathy. And first of all, we want to give a round of applause to Kathy and for all the work that she's done, as well as the rest of the BAG committee to make this event happen. So, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right. So it sounds like they didn't have their coffee this morning, so I want to try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. All right. Thank you. Well, I'd like to welcome you to our first annual Black History Month celebration by SFMTA's Black and African American Affinity Group. This year's theme is Looking Back While Moving Forward, celebrating those who led the fight for justice on public transit in San Francisco. Today we are recognizing Charlotte L. Brown and Mary Ellen Pheasant, who were both courageous in their efforts to ensure that public transit is accessible to all San Franciscans. Charlotte L. Brown was an American educator and civil rights activist who was the first to legally challenge racial segregation in the United States when she filed a lawsuit against San Francisco Streetcar Company Omnibus Railroads in the 1860s after she was forcibly removed from a streetcar. And this was a segregated streetcar here in San Francisco. She sued the company, won, and was awarded the sum of $5,000 in 1864, which I imagine was quite a bit at that time in our country's history. Mary Ellen Pheasant also successfully attacked racial discrimination in San Francisco public conveyances after she and two other Black women were ejected from a city streetcar in 1866. She took the Omnibus Railroad Company to court twice, of which the second lawsuit was taken all the way to the California Supreme Court. The court ruled that streetcar exclusion based on race was unlawful. And both lawsuits challenged racist practices, and in 1893, the California State Legislature enacted a prohibition on streetcar segregation. We'll give that a round of applause. Thank you. I will now turn the mic back over to Kathy.
Thank you, Kenya. So now I'm going to have Mary Travis Allen do a land acknowledgement. Come on up, Mary.
Thank you. Welcome. My name's Mary Travis Allen, and I am a senior operations manager with my office here at Islayas Creek. I am of the Mayagna, Chorotega people on my mother's side from Nicaragua, and Turtle Clan Seneca from the Allegheny Reservation in New York on my father's side. I want to thank the organizers of this Black History Month celebration for inviting me and allowing me to give recognition to the land and the people whose land we are standing. Welcome to the homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone. This land was called Islay for the cherries that grew here and provided food to the people and animals that lived here. The creek was clean water that fed into the other waterways throughout this area to nourish the land where plants and animals live. The only original people who lived on this land are the Ramaytush Ohlone people. They lived on this land before it was taken, and the people forced to leave or forced into slavery. I ask that the Creator bless all that are gathered here for this event on this land today, and to all our ancestors who fought for us to still be here today. Aho. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Adrienne Heim, and I'm here to introduce one of my favorite coworkers, a tremendous talent at the agency, Lolita Sweet, who will come and sing Lift Every Voice. It's also known as the National Black Anthem. So, for further ado, Lolita Sweet.
Thank you. I'm Lolita Sweet, Public Information Officer at San Francisco MTA. Many of you know. And I am an entertainer by the weekend. We're going to do the Black National Anthem that was written by James Weldon Johnson and Rosamond Johnson. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you.
Okay, so up next I'm going to have Irella Blackwood, and then we have a schedule change because the mayor is going to speak, but she has another engagement that was last minute, and then as soon as she walks in, she's going to speak. Okay, so Irella.
Good afternoon, everybody. Something that I tell my kids when I'm explaining the civil rights movement and when I'm telling them about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of our local American heroes, I say, if something's not right, you have to fight. And so that is why you saw people in the streets protesting, marching, sitting in on segregated cafes. Something was not right. So they had to fight. And that's why they had to elect new people, write new laws, get organized. And that's what we did here at the MTA through this group. The Black and African American Affinity Group is our way of protesting, in a sense, because we are getting ourselves together, staying organized. We had an outcry of different issues throughout the agency. You guys have seen the public hearings on racism in City Hall. Most importantly, the mayor created a racial equity framework and the administration code that really helped us to feel like we have a foundation to have this group. We were alarmed when we saw the Department of Human Resources showing that MTA is the leading department where we have the highest percentage of blacks that are subject to SFMTA discipline. For example, we had 261 disciplines, 50% of them were against black employees. 31% of probationary releases were against black employees. So we got together and we said, our mission is all about recruitment and retention for Black and African American in the agency. We are working to ensure that we create an environment that is equitable, inclusive for all the disenfranchised Black and African American employees in the workplace. We actively support the personal and professional development of our members, and we are working with executive staff like Jeff Tumlin. We worked with Tom McGuire to make sure our voices were heard. It's one thing to talk about the problem, but it's a whole nother thing to talk about solutions and recommendations and giving suggestions for a better workplace. Because we all want the same thing, a healthy work environment. And again, when you look at the history books, you want to see where did you stand? Or were you on the side of complacency? Or were you on the side of making change? Like they did in the 1960s, like they're doing now. So that's kind of the history of the Black and African American Affinity Group. I see the mayors here, so I am going to cut my speech. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Armella. And without further ado, we have San Francisco Mayor London Breed. Come on up.
Hello, everybody. I thought y'all was gonna feed me first. Well, first of all, I'm really excited to be here, especially since this is the first time you are holding an African American History Month event for the SFMTA. So I'm really excited and honored to be one of your first speakers at this incredible event. So congratulations to the committee and the people who put this together. Thank you so much. It's also really nice outside. It's so sunny, and I want to just go and hang outside and enjoy the sun. But let me just start by saying really how much I appreciate the workforce of the city and how much I'm aware of the challenges that we know still continue to exist, especially as it relates to our African American employees. I know when I first started as mayor, I was basically getting it left and right from the folks who work for this department. We know that there were real challenges, and we were able to bring someone in to help deal with a number of the HR issues and really try to put this department on the right path, but we know this is a large department, and some of the challenges that have existed in this department have been kind of embedded in the culture over many, many years. And I'm here to tell you it's a new day, and we're going to change that culture. Yes. We're going to change that culture. Starting with a new director who has really assured me in every meeting that we've had, because this comes up in every meeting, that he is going to continue to work to dismantle what we know are the challenges with the culture that have led to disproportionately African Americans not only being disciplined, but also released at higher rates than others. And so we are not unaware of those challenges, but we are excited about new leadership and a new opportunity to make a real change. And as we celebrate Black History Month in San Francisco, I can't help but think about just the historical significance of this department and what it has represented for the African American community in this city. In fact, many of the people that I grew up with, the first opportunity for them to get employment was driving for Muni in this city. The first opportunity for them to get employment was as mechanics and doing the work that exists in SFMTA. My Uncle Norman not only retired many, many years ago, but even after he passed away, his wife was still able to collect his pension in order to take care of herself, my Aunt Lavinia. And I just think about my family's history and so many people in the city who have had the opportunity to benefit from the employment here at the SFMTA, but we also know that there have been challenges in this city as a whole. And even though my Aunt Lavinia and Uncle Norman and my grandmother and others were able to work as maid and as Muni drivers and doing many of the various jobs in San Francisco back then, today doing those same jobs with higher pay still don't lead to the opportunity to be able to afford to live in San Francisco. So we know we have work to do. And many of you know, I grew up here, born and raised. I grew up in Plaza East, and I saw the changes over the years. I saw as we even tore down Plaza East. You remember OC, some of you who grew up in San Francisco, 300 units. They were torn down and only 200 units were built. And many of the people that I lived in Plaza East with were moved to Vallejo and other cities. We barely were able to get a low-income unit with my grandmother and my aunt while I was in college. And it was very challenging, but we saw the entire community change with those bad decisions. So where did we think the other 100 families that live in Plaza East were going to go? And in fact, many of the other 200 families weren't even offered the opportunity to come back. And when my grandmother wanted to go back into Plaza East, there were a lot of complications. So there were a lot of mistakes made. And one of the things that is important to me as mayor is that we change what we do now so that those mistakes don't continue. And part of that is, number one, supporting our workforce and doing a better job at encouraging, uplifting, expressing appreciation and acknowledgement, and breaking down and breaking down some of the divisive culture that has put us in this situation in the first place. Everybody here, you all serve such a critical role to the success of this city. And we need everyone here to be happy with the work that they're doing and support it because it's so important to the city. So when given the opportunity, whenever I'm invited to talk to employees for this city, if I'm available, I will show up because you show up for us every single day. And even sometimes when you're sick. We don't want you to do that, but we appreciate it. You all matter because of the work you do. And now, as a result, we also have to understand that the responsibility of the leadership of this city is to start thinking about how we continue to support the workforce. And what that means is, how is San Francisco going to look 10 years from now if we don't build more housing? How do we make sure that when we're looking at opportunities, we're more creative and we're making a direct connection to the workforce, the people who are commuting 2 and 3 hours to get to San Francisco, who are serving their city that they might have been born and raised in but can't afford to live here anymore with pride? How do we make a real connection between all of you and your service to the city and making sure that we're not just issuing paychecks, that we're issuing opportunities, that we're providing the level of support you need so that you thrive and your family thrives. That is what my mission is. I want to change San Francisco. I want to change who lives in San Francisco. I want people who used to live in San Francisco to move back to San Francisco. And so when we're talking about, I think I went off on the tangent. I know it's Black History Month. But the reason why this is important is because when you look and we talk about and we celebrate Black History Month, it's a time to acknowledge the failures of this city to the African American community, the failures around housing and housing affordability, the failures around employment, and how, as we said earlier, disproportionately African Americans are disciplined in higher rates and released from their positions in higher rates than others. How disproportionately African Americans are overrepresented with the number of homeless people, 37%. Overrepresented in so many categories and not in a good way. So no matter if you're African American or not, you have to feel some kind of way about the fact that we pride ourselves on being this diverse city. We take a lot of pride in saying that. But what happened to the African American community that helped build this city? So we all have a responsibility. It's not because I'm African American, it's not because I'm the first African American woman to be mayor. That's not enough. It's because we have failed over the years, and so what that means is that we have to be deliberate about the changes that we make, the investments we make in housing, the investments we make in employment and training and providing opportunities and helping our workforce, how we continue to support and lift up the people who take care of this city. It's so critical. So when we talk about housing, and Jeff will tell you that we've had this conversation about what you hear about one of your yards and the housing opportunities that are being discussed. And my pushback is, well, what about the people who work for SFMTA? How do we make a direct connection between the housing that we want to build, and yes, we want to maximize the number of units? How do we make sure they have a right of first refusal when it comes to the housing that's being built on the property that's owned by SFMTA? How do we make those connections? I want you to know that this may sound good, but it is hard as hell. It is not easy when you are trying to fight to do the kinds of things that you know are going to make a difference. People like their views. They like their neighborhoods. And what I say to those same people, especially on the west side or places where you have single family homes, I say, how many of you have been here your whole life for 50, 60, 70 years? Bunch of hands go up. How many of you raised your kids here? Bunch of hands go up. How many of your kids still live in San Francisco? Hardly any hands. Just think about that. For those of you who want to live here, have been here for so many years, or who can't afford to live here anymore, San Francisco has changed. And I don't want to look back 10 years from now and wonder, why didn't we do more to change things for the better? Why didn't we make the right decisions back then? Why didn't we do more to help support our workforce and provide opportunities for housing? Why didn't we make the connections? That is my focus as mayor, and you're an important part of that as well. I want to thank all of you for the work that you do, and also take this opportunity to acknowledge, I know we have some of your commissioners who are here today. I think they've already been acknowledged, but some of you also know that San Francisco now has an Office of Racial Equity, which I'm really excited about. And Shakira is the director of that office, and she's joining you here today because it's not enough to talk about the data. We need to make changes, and we need to make changes for the African American community. So I've been invited, every year, African American History Month, I'm invited to speak at a lot of things. And I am talking about the same thing. I'm talking about equity for the African American community, equity for the workforce, equity as it relates to housing access, equity for the things that will truly allow us as a city to be proud of our diversity, to be proud that we all are a part of what makes San Francisco an incredible city. I am taking every opportunity to remind people that although we have come a long way, and yes, it is great being mayor and being known as the first African American woman mayor, but it's not enough. And it won't be enough till we make the kinds of changes that will provide an opportunity for each and every one of you to live and to thrive in this beautiful city that we call home. Thank you for the opportunity for being here today.
Thank you. Okay. So today, everyone heard about how we are honoring Charlotte L. Brown and Mary Ellen Pleasant. They're two strong black female leaders. And let us never forget the many challenges, the ridicule, and even persecution that they faced standing up to racism and discrimination. We must never forget the legacy they left behind, the legacy that allowed for blacks to have the same privileges as non-blacks in a city that would later become the Mecca of diverse culture. Next, I want to acknowledge you, Director Tumlin. One of the first things when you came to the agency was you wanted to meet with the Black and African American Affinity Group. And that was the catalyst to opening the door so that our voices, the voices of blacks and African Americans, could be heard. But more importantly, to address issues of inequity that had gone overlooked for so many years. Now, I would be remiss, I don't see Tom McGuire, but I want to acknowledge him and thank him for stepping in when he was acting director prior to Jeff's arrival, and he created a comfortable space for us to begin the dialogue on invoking change throughout the agency. After our very first meeting with Director Tumlin, there was just this overwhelming, greater sense of hope that rebuilding was going to happen, and this new journey would require our help as well. It was very obvious that Director Tumlin knew that if we wanted to make a difference, he knew to go to the epicenter of inequity, and he came directly to us. I would also like to acknowledge that Kimberly Ackerman, who is here. She's the Deputy Director of SFMTA's HR. She also came right in and had a seat at the table with us to go over the statistics that were stagnated in areas of hiring and retention, even the disciplinary actions, to create an action plan to change these outcomes. Director Tumlin, what sealed the deal was in December when you asked, what more could you do to help us along this journey of change? And I told you that February was right around the corner. What could we do? Okay. And I said, we'd like to do something to make 2020 have a different and totally, completely different outlook. One of renewed hope and progress. And without hesitation, you said, count you in. Now, as we stand here and witness the progress that is being made in so many areas that once lacked equitable balance, it speaks volumes. But more importantly is the fact that you showed up. You didn't just tell us what we wanted to hear. You received us, you listened to us, you shared your ideas with us, you have been transparent with us, and you have committed to continue to working with us. I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Without further ado, Director Tumlin, please.
When I woke up this morning with my eye swollen shut, the first thing I did was cancel most of my meetings and convert the others to conference calls. But I also knew that I had to show up here because it is here where we are coming to honor our heroes. Charlotte Brown and Mary Ellen Pleasant are heroes. They fought hard in the 1860s because it was right. And they secured the right for everyone, African Americans, yes, and everyone, to access public transportation, because public transportation is for everyone. These women are heroes. These women were also supported by lawyers and paralegals who did the hard work, underpaid, that was necessary to take their case all the way to the Supreme Court and to get the ruling that they got. That required an immense amount of support. These women were supported by heroes. These women were also supported by their families, by people who will never be acknowledged, who did the work at home to do the cooking and the cleaning and the thankless tasks and the emotional work of when Charlotte Brown and Mary Ellen Pleasant were ready to give up because the fight seemed hopeless. They were supported. They were told, no, fight on. It is worth it. The cause is just, and we're going to win. All of these people are heroes. I'm also here to support and honor the heroes in this agency. Those of you who are in this room, it is not in your job description to heal the SFMTA. It is not in your job description to do the quantitative research necessary to document systemic racism in our organization. It's not in your job description, and you are not paid overtime to sit down with me and to develop collaboratively a strategy for moving this agency forward on a path of healing. So of course, even though my eye was swollen this morning, I'm here to honor this work, and I'm deeply humbled by all of you who are here. I am eager to play whatever support role I need to play in helping all of us heal this agency. Public transit is for everyone, and this agency is not going to be able to deliver on the promise of public transit being for everyone if we're not here ready to support this agency being for everyone, for all of us. So thank you to all of you with the Black and African American Working Group. I've already talked too long, and I'm not sure who I hand the mic over to next. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tumlin. So next up, we will have Kimberly Ackerman, the Deputy Director of SFMTA's Human Resources.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, this is wonderful. This is such a great honor to be here, but even more so, it's a great opportunity to speak to you as the HR Director here at MTA. In September 2018, Mayor London Breed issued an executive order to encourage recruitment and retention efforts for a diverse workforce. And in HR, we are committed to that diversity. Cultural diversity is all about population differences that are well represented within the workplace. As of last week, we implemented a recruitment policy based on hiring diversity best practices. And as part of that process, it was a very collaborative effort. There was a lot of input from employees and managers alike. And the reason why that's important is because we wanted to make sure that our hiring process is transparent, it's fair, and it's accountable. And we are committed to increasing workforce diversity. Some of the things that this policy recognizes and does is that one of the things we've heard from employees is that, you know, in terms of employees being qualified for positions, there are minimum qualifications that are in place that employees say, well, why do we have that? Why do we have a degree? Why is there a requirement for a college degree? We actually started a few of our jobs last week to have that engagement, that process with managers, so we can dialogue about, you know, why do we have the necessary degree? Let's review the minimum qualifications. That's important because that way it opens up the possibility for and opportunities for employees to recruit for various positions and also for promotional opportunities. The other thing that we've done in our policy and identified is have a diverse interview panel and structured interviews. A recent survey indicated that organizations that implement diverse interview panels are seeing a 41% increase in the percentage of new hires that are women or minorities, and also a 70% likelihood of hiring African American candidates. That's a pretty incredible statistic. While this is not new, we are committed to it in our policy, and we are going to continue our commitment to have diverse interview panels and a structured interview process. The other thing that we're doing in terms of hiring and retention and diversity is we are integrating workforce diversity in our interview questions. Glassdoor found that 67% of job seekers use diversity as an important factor when considering companies and job offers. We're going to add mandatory diversity interview questions to each interview panel. That way, it's important to show our candidates, people who are interested in working in MTA, that diversity is important to our culture. We also will be able to see candidates' commitment to diversity as well. That's how important it is. We also are going to seek diverse recruiting sources. You know, oftentimes our jobs are publicized with the city and county of San Francisco. We want to go beyond that. We had a recruitment recently where for the first time we actually went to another transit system. We have a transit resource posting site. So we're going to look at those opportunities. We've had managers say, hey, can you list them on your intranet? We want to make sure that we're doing that and make sure that we are promoting a diverse recruitment pipeline. We also want to continue to build and develop our apprenticeship, our internships, and our fellowship programs as a talent pipeline to promote diversity in our workforce and encourage promotive opportunities for our employees. We still have a lot of work ahead, but we are committed to it. And as Mayor London Breed said, it's not easy, but we're moving in the right direction, and together it will take all of us. But I want to share a viewpoint that I agree with from a TED Talk that I recently listened to. And it was about this African-American woman who's a CEO of a financial institution. She said that researchers have coined a phrase called color blindness. And she said, at first, flush, you kind of think, well, that's good, right? That's a good thing that we don't see color. And she argues and says, no, it's not good. Because when organizations avoid because what happens is that when people do not see color, then they miss the opportunities to avoid conversations about race and equality. She says that discussions about race are a conversation third rail, but this is what we need to do. We need to talk about it. She says that discussing race makes people uncomfortable, so people don't want to talk about it. But she says, which I agree, ignoring a problem is never the way to solve it, and discrimination is a gargantuan problem. She said that organizations should not be colorblind, they should be color brave. Color brave organizations are those that talk about it, they want to have the tough conversations. We need to talk about racism. We need to have those tough conversations in order to heal, but also, better yet, to solve problems. So I challenge all of us not to be colorblind, but be color brave. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, it is never too late to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. As we follow along through the program, next up is Kimberly Erickson from Caltrans. She's the acting chief of staff. Kimberly, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the other Kimberly. Kimberly Erickson, the acting chief of staff for Caltrans, and I have to tell you, I am honored and privileged and humbled to be a part of this. So thanks for having me today. Caltrans director Tok Samashakan sends his regrets for being unable to be here, but he has a very, very aggressive travel schedule. He is our first Black director of Caltrans, so it's very exciting for us. But he asked me to pass along his best and hopes to see you here someday soon in this beautiful city of yours. On behalf of the director and myself, let me express how much we appreciate the celebration of Black History Month. I've worked in transportation for 20 years now. I know you can't tell, but it's been 20 years. So naturally, I love spotlighting some of the brilliant African American minds who have helped improve our American transportation system. I don't think it's done often enough. So I'm going to take us back and talk a little history. I'll start in 1893 in Nashville, Tennessee. There, Albert Robinson patented an important life-saving safety improvement for street trolleys. His new design actually helped prevent trolleys from derailing when turning a corner or going downhill. 3 years later in Newark, New Jersey, Charles B. Brooks invented the first self-propelled sweet sweeping truck. So keeping those streets clear in the era of horse-drawn carriages was probably very important. Much appreciated by the folks of 1896, right? Now, it didn't stop there. Brooks's design also allowed for the truck's front brushes to be interchanged with scrapers in the winter to assist with snow removal. Later, 1938, Minnesota, Frederick Jones designs a portable air cooling unit for trucks to allow for better transport of perishable food. This design became especially important during World War II for the transportation of blood, medicine, food for use for our troops, for those on the battlefield. And lastly, Mr. Meredith Gordine was a prolific inventor and later an energy exec in the second half of the 20th century. He operated his own research laboratory in New Jersey, located less than an hour's drive from Thomas Edison's famous Menlo Park lab. Gordine employed 150 individuals, and among his inventions was an exhaust purification system for cars today that's referred to as the catalytic converter. So these examples of our history that we hear, in my opinion, is too little about, these are important to talk about, and they're important to celebrate. No doubt there are more innovations to come, but a major message that I and the director wish to share is how much I believe that non-inventors also contribute to our transportation system. By this I mean how much useful feedback and ideas our African American communities have to share from the community experience if we just involve them more. We know that in the last century, transportation planning didn't always include communities when designing projects for the state transportation system. But this is now our major commitment from Caltrans, engagement. This is not just Californians' transportation system, it's a system for all Californians. This is a California for all. And as we work to tackle our 21st century challenges involving congestion and affordable housing and equity and economy and all of those things that we talk and think about, we need to proactively engage these communities, the affected communities and all of the affected communities in California, to come up with solutions in the planning process and beyond. Now, we need to remember our most vulnerable users. We've got communities out there who don't have cars, who rely on mass transit, our pedestrians, our cyclists, those who are using your facilities, and let's not forget about them, because all too often when we think of Caltrans, we think of highways. And as we effectively leverage everyone's input, I'm certain Caltrans will improve our transportation system in ways that would make those African American inventors I mentioned, pioneers like those we're celebrating today, Charlotte Brown, Mary Ellen Pleasant, and all of California, all Californians proud. Again, on behalf of Tokes Amashakin, thank you for inviting us here today.
Thank you, Kimberly. All right. I'm now going to introduce our keynote speaker, but before I do, I realized I wanted to make sure that we acknowledged our agency's leadership. We had Director Tumlin speak earlier, and I see that we have a couple of directors here in the audience. If you wouldn't mind standing, we have Director Gwyneth Borden, who's the Vice Chair of the MTA Board of Directors. And we have Director Cheryl Breekland, who's actually ending her term next month. So I have a question for you. What if every department in the city and county of San Francisco incorporated a lens of racial equity in all of its policies and programs to ensure that systematic inequities are addressed holistically by our city? Well, our next speaker is charged to make that happen. Shakira Smiley is the director of the Office of Racial Equity, which is a division of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission and was created in July of 2019. And Ms. Smiley was just appointed in January as the first director of that office. She's the daughter of a social worker and the granddaughter of a Black Panther, so she really was raised to be in the position that she's in now. And has, while she's a New York native, she's lived here in San Francisco for over 12 years. Ms. Smiley has worked as a seasoned organizer and community development strategist, and has served here in the city and county as the legislative aide for former Supervisor Valerie Brown in District 5. And prior to that, she actually led efforts at the Southeast Community Facility, where she was the acting executive director, and led the process for designing and organizing their new facility that's being built now just down the street at 1550 Evans. Shakira also served as one of the first human rights fellows for the city of New York, and is a Fulbright scholar, receiving her master's in anthropology after studying in Italy, and has an undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania. So she's a very accomplished leader here in our city. Like many of us, Shakira understands the struggles of having to navigate working in a complex bureaucratic environment while trying to push forward and making systematic change happen. And we know that the work that she'll be doing in the Office of Racial Equity will be bringing that agenda forward here in the city and county. So let's give a warm welcome for Shakira.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good
Hi, I am between you and lunch, so I will make this short and sweet. I was also a food justice activist for a very, very long time, so I know the importance of feeding folks. So, but thank you so much for having me here today. I want to amplify Mary's land acknowledgement as we sit on traditional unceded lonely land. And Islas Creek was an important waterway and food site for the tribes that preceded us. I also want to thank our ancestors whose legacy is alive and well in this room today for our first ever African American and Black. Excuse me, I got a little brain fart. I want to acknowledge our ancestors such as Charlotte Brown and Mary Ellen Pleasant. We couldn't be here without their work and their tireless attack on the system of white supremacy within San Francisco at that time. There was a lot of bravery that took in order to stand up against those systems, and we continue that work here today. I also want to thank Director Tumlin for your work. Nice to meet you, Kimberly. And also our honorable SFMTA commissioners who've also been leading a charge of equity from the commission as well. And then I also want to thank all of the workers. Raise your hand if you work for SFMTA. Yes, I want to thank all of you. Can you give yourselves a round of applause? Yes. So, and also a special shout out goes to the Black African American Affinity Group for SFMTA. Thank you to Kathy, Adrian, Kenya, Irella, Kim, Kika, all of you. Thank you for your organizing. So I'm proud to stand here today as the inaugural director for the newly created Office of Racial Equity for the City and County of San Francisco. I'm super proud to work with Director Cheryl Davis, who's the director of the Human Rights Commission, and to work together to root out and address systemic and structural racial inequities that are present within San Francisco city government and also outside in the city at large as well. So our mission is twofold. So this landmark legislation was passed last year by Supervisor Sandra Lee Fewer and Supervisor Valley Brown, and then signed into law by Mayor Breed. And I think it's really helpful for me to always speak after the mayor because her mandate is very clear, so it makes my job a lot more easy. So it's time to get to work. It's time to get to work. We know that racism exists here in city government. We know that racism exists here in San Francisco, and it's time to enough with the reports, enough with dragging our feet. It's time for us to start banding together and help build that movement for racial equity. And I'm gonna help you do that. I'm gonna be your facilitator, I'll be your advocate, I'll be your fighter. I will be your, if you need me to watch your kids, whatever you need me to do so you can be at the front lines to help me do this work. Right? It takes community, right? It takes community. I'm a great babysitter, by the way. So Kenya talked a little bit about my background. I don't come from this position from a philosophical sense. I come at this position as a community organizer, as an activist, as a systems thinker, and as a person who has to move through this world every day as a Black woman, particularly a Black woman from a working class background. I was raised in Harlem, New York, to a 15-year-old teenage mom, against the context of the crack cocaine epidemic that was ravaging Harlem at the time, and also her work as a social worker in regards to the HIV epidemic that also ravaged our community. And it was hard. However, I wanted to make sure that those experiences, while formative and defined my perspective, it also showed me the resilience and grit of my community as well. And when there weren't city services in my neighborhood and there wasn't, effective bus service, we found a way to get each other around, to lift each other up, and to make sure that we could take care of our own. And I see that same grit and resilience in this room, and I see that same grit and resilience within our neighborhoods as well. However, we as public servants, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're building a system that serves everyone, particularly for our communities of color, and particularly for our Black community here in San Francisco. And when, these services did not exist, we had our members of our community step up and fill in the gaps. So how are we rewarding them? How are we serving them? How are we lifting them up? And when they come and work for us and work within the city and are embedded in the social fabric of city government, how are we treating them? So these are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about and connecting my history to understanding my work that needs to get done today. One of the things that's also been really important to me is like I know who I am, I know where I come from, and I also understand that as a granddaughter of a Black Panther and the daughter of a social worker, that the people who are closest to the pain need to be closest to the power. And all of you, and I've talked to some of you, I see it, I hear it, have been close to a lot of pain for a long time. And it's time to build power and get closer to that power and work collaboratively with your leadership. And it looks like you have listening ears now, which is great. Maybe eyes closed a little bit, but hopefully they can open soon. Eyes closed, ears are wide open, which is fantastic, right? It's a new day, and it's time to get new work done. Each of you work every single day to move this city, right? Yes? Yes, thank you. But how can we make sure that the city is moving fast enough for you? I think we need to make sure that we're on time. Time's now. And when I'm thinking about this issue, I'm thinking about it from an intersectional lens. So an intersectional lens means I'm looking at it from multiple layers, right? So if we're gonna be solving for transit equity, it means real tangible change, particularly for our communities of color. So we need greater and more efficient connectivity to outer parts of the city, including here in the Southeast. We need to make sure we have better safety so folks feel seen and respected on our transit lines. We want better reliability. We want improved access for our vulnerable folks so they can afford to take Muni, but also helping our folks who are differently abled and disabled so they can get to where they need to go. But in order to have better transit equity, we need people. We need people to do this work. We need each and every one of you. And I know that each of you also live at intersections, right? You're not just a driver or a professional administrator, right? You are a Black driver, right? You are a brown professional administrator, right? You are a woman. You bring these lenses to your work every single day. So because you bring those intersections, we need to solve at those intersections too and be real about how your experience is different because of who you are. And those lived experiences help inform and help you do a better job. But we need to make sure that we're taking care of you too. And the Office of Racial Equity will be a part of that process. I'm looking at this issue from all sides. We've talked about pipelines, hiring, recruitment. I'm also thinking about retention and mobility. So how do we get folks to stay? How can they move up within city government? How do we make sure that our leadership is reflective of the folks and communities that we want to serve? And how can we also retire with dignity? One thing that I also learned is that there's racial disparities in our retirement system. So when we have folks who have given their lives to serving this city in their golden years, sometimes they still can't afford to make ends meet. And that's particularly for our Black and brown folks. And that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. These issues, we can see them within city government and we can see them citywide. And when it comes to issues of racial equity, I always say this, Black and brown bodies are kind of like the canaries in the coal mine. We know this stuff is happening, but can we acknowledge it? And I want to think about how we can tackle racial equity in the same way that we think about climate change. We need to triage. We need to treat this like a natural disaster, right? What would happen if we had a huge earthquake, right? We deploy resources and people, right? We'll get to where the problem is, right? At ground zero. We would make sure that we would have a plan for resilience and to help people get back on their feet. When it comes to structural racism, that's a slow, natural disaster. And part of it is man-made too. So how can we work together to triage and get at the heart of that issue? So I promise you, through the Office of Racial Equity, there's a few things at the top of my list. So we're definitely going to be demanding and holding San Francisco institutions and city agencies accountable to dismantle racism. We're gonna claim it, we're gonna lead with race, and we're gonna be unafraid. We want to make sure that the city becomes a place that's a home for everyone, from our folks who are newly arrived to the folks who have been here for generations. We want to make sure that the city respects and trusts community agency, wisdom, and expertise, particularly from our Black community. I want to work with each and every one of you to convene and coalition build around a movement for racial equity. I can't do this alone. Can we please not just rely on Black women to fix everything for us? Right? She feels it. Yes. I need all of your help. I need all of your help. We need to make sure that we're fighting for collective liberation. And when I say liberation, I mean freedom. I want our folks to be free. I want them to be free so that they feel safe, they feel nourished, they feel housed, that they're joyful, that they're economically secure, and that they have the freedom to unlock their full potential. Collective liberation is meaning that we're reaching to self-determination for our folks. And that's what going beyond equity means. That's what I'm fighting for. That is my lens. We need to also make sure we're advocating for successful policies that provide immediate and tangible gains for Black and brown folks. And I'm looking at those solutions now on how we can triage. Like I said, this is a disaster. So let's get moving. I also want to make sure that we work harder to nurture and make sure that our communities are whole. I don't want you all to feel invisible in the city that is your home. And too often that's the case. Each of you deserves to be treated with dignity and respect out in the world and at work. And we can work together to create that safety, that dignity, and that respect. This year, I look forward to working with all of you as we build our citywide racial equity framework. You'll be having racial equity leaders and your working group who will be connecting directly with this office to build that framework and those plans. The SFMTA will also be mandated to complete and finish a racial equity action plan to be delivered at the end of this year, which we'll be reading and scoring to make sure that we're meeting our goals internally and externally. So as we move forward, as we get closer to eating, I want to thank everyone for inviting me here today. We walk along this road together, and I can't wait for all the things that we'll accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Shapira. Appreciate it. Before we close, I just wanted to acknowledge Dante King could not be here. He is our leader of cultural change, equity, and employee experience. He had arrangements a year ago made, and he could not change it. So I want to acknowledge him and the hard work that he does. And before I close, I also wanted to say, like 5 years ago, I would never have believed that I'd be standing here and hosting an event like this. And 5 years ago, I came into contact with my manager, Kathleen Sakalaris. She's there. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Kathleen embodies everything, integrity. She trusts my work. She acknowledges me as a team member, not just as a worker. And she just embodies everything, and she motivates me, and she mentors to me, and she trusts my work and everything that I do. And a lot of people can't say that. So every chance I get, I always acknowledge her because I've come a long way, and I don't want to share my story, but my story is much better. So when I left home today, I was very proud to be a part of this because 5 years ago, I would never have dreamed that I would be here. And dreams do come true. I do believe that. I have new friends that don't look like me. Tracy Minakuchi, Anna. I have Carly Payne. Thank you, Chiamaka. You look like me, though. Hoel, Victoria Wise. We dance together. And there's a lot more that we can do. So, and it all just starts with communicating and getting to know people. Because, in a sense, we're all alike. We work here. So we should be more like family together. And I thank you for all of my new friends and friends to make. And thank you. And we have food. And enjoy. Thank you. Thank you.